Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Listen, we need to talk about the absolute end of the road. I'm talking about that moment when we end up, 6 feet under. Is that it? Is it just lights out, fade to black? Or are we going somewhere else? It is the single biggest question humanity has been asking since we first looked up at the stars and realized, wow, we feel small. But here's the central confusion that it drives me crazy. When we talk about people who don't believe in a God or aren't sure, we toss around words like atheist and agnostic as if they're the same thing, but they aren't. They represent fundamentally different ways of wiring your brain to look at the universe. So our mission today is to decode this whole spectrum of belief, from total unshakable certainty to, admitted humble ignorance, and finally clear up these definitions once and for all.
It's a massive undertaking, isn't it? And you're right to start there, with those huge existential stakes. We're dealing with concepts that people have been debating and fighting wars over for millennia. What we're really peeling back today is the distinction between what we believe in our gut and what we claim to know in our heads. And while these labels might seem modern, the struggle to understand truth is, it's as old as humanity itself.
Exactly. And looking through the stack of research we have for this deep dive, I found something that actually made me laugh right off the bat. It points out that a lot of atheists actually argue the label atheist shouldn't even exist. It feels like a non-word to them.
Which is an interesting philosophical flex, right?
Totally. The analogy they use is astrology. Like, we don't have a specific word for people who don't believe in astrology. I don't walk around introducing myself as a non-astrologer. I'm not an astrologer.
Yeah.
So the argument is, why do we need a special label for not believing in a God?
It's a valid point, in theory. In a vacuum, you wouldn't need a word for a lack of something. But we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a world where belief systems are the default setting for billions of people. The research emphasizes that the atheist movement has grown significantly in recent years. It's evolved from a quiet personal choice into a cultural force. You have these outspoken figures like Richard Dawkins or Ricky Gervais who have turned atheism into an identity. And when you have high-profile figures advocating for a specific worldview, the label becomes a rallying point. It stops being just a lack of belief and starts being a community.
That makes sense. It's a team jersey now. But before we get into the heavy hitters like Dawkins and the modern debates, we need to rewind. We need the origin story, the other side of the coin, the agnostics. Agnostic sounds very academic. It sounds like something you'd hear in a tweed-filled lecture hall.
It is academic, but the roots are surprisingly punchy. It comes from the Greek. You have gnosis, which means to know, knowledge regarding the divine, and then you add the prefix a, which is used to state the opposite. So literally translated, agnostic means without knowledge. Not without belief, but without knowledge.
Without knowledge. That feels surprisingly humble, or maybe just evasive.
It's intended to be humble, but rigorous. To really get why this matters, we have to transport ourselves back to 1869.
Okay, set the scene.
Picture Victorian London. Foggy streets, gas lamps. We're at a meeting of the Metaphysical Society. Now, this isn't just a book club. This is a philosophical fight club. You have the Archbishop of York in one corner, hardcore atheists in the other, Unitarians, deists. Everyone has a label. Everyone has a flag they're waving.
And in walks our protagonist.
Enter Thomas Henry Huxley. He's a biologist, famously known as Darwin's bulldog, because he defended evolution so fiercely. He's sitting there, listening to all these brilliant men claim they know the secrets of the universe. The Christians knew God existed. The atheists knew God didn't. And Huxley realized he felt, left out.
You need like a flag.
Exactly. He realized he didn't have that gnosis. He couldn't claim to know the unknowable, so he coined agnostic as a shield. But, and this is crucial, it wasn't just a shrug. He wasn't saying, I have no idea what's going on.
So it wasn't just laziness.
Far from it. Huxley argued that agnosticism is the essence of the scientific method. He said, and I love this concept, that a man shall not say he knows or believes that which he has no scientific grounds for professing to know or believe.
Oh, I like that. So it's a discipline. It's saying, if I can't prove it with data, if I can't put it in a test tube or measure it, then I'm not going to claim I know it.
Precisely. It's an intellectual restraint. And that brings us to the core distinction that so many people miss. Broadly speaking, atheism is about belief. Specifically the unbelief in a God. It's a position on the existence of a deity. But agnosticism, that's a position on the limits of human intelligence. It's the view that we can never know the world beyond sense and experience, beyond the physical realm we live in.
So the atheist looks at the sky and says, there is no God. The agnostic looks at the sky and says, my brain is too small and limited to ever know if there is or isn't because it's outside my reality.
That's the headline difference, yes. One is a conclusion, the other is an admission of limitation. But, humans are messy creatures. We don't usually fit into neat little boxes. You rarely meet someone who is 100% one thing. And that leads us perfectly into Richard Dawkins.
Right, the author of The God Delusion. He proposes that belief isn't binary. It's not just a light switch where you're either a believer or you aren't. It's a spectrum.
The famous Dawkins scale. It's a brilliant tool for visualizing this because it offers 7 levels of belief. And I think if you, the listener, are honest with yourself, you'll find you probably move around on this scale depending on the day.
Okay, let's run through these because I want to see where I land. We start at level 1, the strong theist.
This is the realm of 100% probability, total unshakable certainty. Dawkins quotes C.G. Jung here, who famously said, "I do not believe, I know."
I know. That's intense. That's zero doubt. I spoke to God this morning type of energy. Then we slide down to level 2, the de facto theist.
This is high probability, but just short of 100%. The mindset here is, I don't know for certain, but I strongly believe in God and live my life on the assumption that he is there. This is probably where most religious people actually live. They have faith, but they acknowledge they aren't omniscient.
Right. There's a tiny sliver of what if in the back of their mind, but they ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
Then level 3 is leaning towards theism.
Higher than 50%, but not by much. You're uncertain, but you're inclined to believe. You see a beautiful sunset or a coincidence and think, yeah, there's probably something out there.
And then we hit the dead center. Level 4, the completely impartial zone.
Exactly 50%. This is the true fence-sitter. To them, God's existence and God's non-existence are perfectly equal probabilities. It's a coin toss that, lands on its edge.
I feel like that's an incredibly hard place to stay mentally. Humans hate ambiguity. We usually tip one way or the other eventually.
We do. Our brains are pattern-matching machines. Staying at a perfect 50-50 requires a massive amount of mental discipline or apathy, which brings us to the other side, level 5, leaning towards atheism.
Which is the mirror of level 3. I don't know, but I'm skeptical.
Right. I see the sunset and I just see physics.
Then level 6, the de facto atheist. This corresponds to level 2, very low probability of a God. The thinking is, I don't know for certain, but I think God is very improbable, and I live my life on the assumption that he is not there.
And finally, level 7, the strong atheist. The exact opposite of level 1. This person states, I know there is no God, with the exact same conviction that the level 1 theist has that there is one.
It's funny. Level 1 and level 7 feel like they have more in common with each other than they do with the people in the middle. They're both absolutely certain about something they can't prove.
That's the horseshoe theory of belief. And that's why this scale matters. It challenges the stereotype. We often think atheists are all these angry level 7s shouting at people. But this spectrum shows that many people labeled atheist or agnostic are actually floating in the middle level 4 or 5 or 6. They're open to evidence. They aren't dogmatic.
It takes the heat out of the argument a little bit. It turns it from a war into a gradient. But even with the spectrum, we still have these two main camps, atheist and agnostic. And the breakdown of their differences goes deeper than just the definitions. Let's go head to head.
Let's do it.
Point 1, belief versus knowledge. We touched on this, but let's hammer it home.
It's the fundamental divide. An atheist deals in belief. Specifically, they do not believe. An agnostic deals in knowledge they do not claim to know. One is about your internal compass. The other is about what you can demonstrate to the outside world.
Which leads right into point 2, proof. How do they handle the concept of evidence? Because an atheist looks at an empty room and says, no one is here.
Right. An atheist often argues that the lack of proof for a God is, in itself, enough proof that a God doesn't exist. It's the invisible gardener argument. If you look at a garden and see no gardener and set up cameras and see no gardener, eventually you conclude there is no gardener.
But the agnostic.
The agnostic says, wait a minute. They argue we cannot determine existence through proof one way or the other. Just because we don't see the gardener doesn't mean he isn't invisible or operating in a dimension we can't perceive. They state that we simply cannot know, so God technically can or cannot exist. They refuse to close the case file.
Okay, point 3, classification.
Atheism is classified as a lack of belief. It's a position on a single issue. Agnosticism, however, is a theory of knowledge. It's a framework that supports different belief systems. You can be agnostic about ghosts, about aliens, about the multiverse. It's a tool you use to approach the world.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about point 4, approach in conviction? This feels like a personality difference almost.
It often is. Being a strong atheist is usually based on conviction. They've looked at the evidence and made a firm decision. They are unlikely to change their view without massive proof. Agnostics are often more, let's say, fluid. They care about what is possible to prove as a living person. They're often the ones saying, well, anything is possible, which can drive atheists crazy.
And point 5 is the big one, purpose in the afterlife, the thing I asked about in the intro.
The atheist view is generally stark, but for them, liberating. We are here without a greater purpose, and after death, there is nothing. We are biological machines that stop running. The agnostic view is slightly more open. They would say life after death is unlikely, very unlikely, but technically it is still possible because we haven't crossed that bridge to verify it.
It's that technically possible that keeps the door a tiny bit ajar. Now, before we move on, I want to tackle the logic puzzle that trips everyone up. The one-way street.
Ah, yes. The logical rule that separates the casual thinkers from the deep divers.
The rule is, an agnostic can be an atheist, but a strict atheist cannot be an agnostic. That sounds like a riddle. Break it down for me.
Okay, think of it like a locked door. Behind that door is the answer to the question, is there a God?
Okay, I'm picturing the door. Heavy, iron, locked tight.
Now, the strict level 7 atheist looks at that door and says, I know it's behind there. Nothing. It's an empty room. I don't need to open it to know it's empty. They have a belief that leads to a claim of knowledge. They've decided the room is empty.
Right. Case closed. Walk away.
But the agnostic, even an agnostic who leans toward atheism, looks at the door and says, I don't think there's anyone behind there. I'm living my life as if the room is empty, but I don't have the key. I can't open it to check, so technically I can't say for sure. The agnostic admits the lock exists. The strict atheist claims they already know what's inside.
So an agnostic can be an atheist in practice living without God while admitting they lack the key. But if you're a strict atheist, you're claiming you don't need the key because you already know.
Exactly. Agnosticism allows for the maybe, while strict atheism shuts it down. And that's why you can have agnostic atheists, people who don't believe but admit they don't know, but you can't have agnostic strong atheists. It's a contradiction in terms.
That distinction is crucial. It's the difference between I don't believe and I know there isn't. So we've got the theory, we've got the spectrum. Let's talk about real people. The research digs into some celebrity case studies, which I always love because it shows how these high concept ideas play out in Hollywood.
And it's surprising who falls where. It really humanizes the debate.
Totally. First up, we have Harry Potter himself, Daniel Radcliffe. Now, you'd think growing up in a magical world on set might make you more open to the mystical, but he's pretty firm.
He is. He describes himself as a militant atheist, but with a specific caveat when religion starts impacting legislation.
Right. That's a key distinction. He's not knocking on doors preaching atheism, but when belief enters politics, he puts his armor on. Then there's Morgan Freeman, the man who has literally played God in movies.
And his take is nuanced. He views it as a matter of belief versus science. He is specifically skeptical of the literal interpretations like the creationist view that the world is only 6,000 years old.
Wow.
He seems to separate the concept of a creator from the dogmas of organized religion. He's looking for truth, not stories.
And then my favorite quote in the whole deep dive comes from Brad Pitt. He said, I'm 20% atheist and 80% agnostic.
Which is such a brilliantly honest thing to say. It's a perfect illustration of the spectrum we discussed. He isn't claiming one absolute label. He's acknowledging that part of him doubts entirely, that's the 20%, but the majority of him just resides in the, I don't know. He's comfortable with the mystery.
But if we want to talk about mystery and the struggle between science and spirit, we have to talk about Albert Einstein. He is the ultimate, it's complicated relationship status with God.
Einstein is the white whale of this discussion. Both sides try to claim him. Religious people quote him. Atheists quote him. He was born into a secular Jewish family, and as an adult, he clearly rejected the idea of a personal God, the guy in the beard who grants wishes.
Yeah, listen to this contradiction. On one hand, he says, I want to know how God created this world. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details. That sounds like a mystic. I want to know his thoughts.
It does. It implies a reverence for a design, an intelligence behind the universe. He looked at the math of relativity and saw something beautiful and orderly. He called that God.
But then you have the other side. He also said, I do not believe in immortality of the individual, and I consider ethics to be an exclusively human concern with no superhuman authority behind it.
So on the one hand, I want to know God's thoughts. On the other, ethics is just a human invention, and when you die, you rot. This is the Einstein paradox.
It feels like he was struggling to find a language for what he felt.
I think he was. He rejected the man in the sky idea, the personal God who punishes sins. But he was clearly allergic to the arrogance of strict atheism. He felt a cosmic religious feeling. He illustrates that you can be deeply spiritual and filled with wonder without subscribing to a specific religion. He shows that the binary of believer versus non-believer might be too simple for a mind like his.
It really is. And maybe that's the point. We try to pin these labels on ourselves, atheist, agnostic, theist-like name tags at a conference. But the reality is so much messier.
It is, and I think the biggest takeaway from all this research isn't about picking a team, it's about precision. We often use these words as synonyms, but they are distinct tools. Atheism deals with belief, what you accept in your heart. Agnosticism deals with knowledge, what you can prove.
And realizing that most of us, if we're honest, are probably somewhere in the murky middle of that Dawkins scale.
Exactly. And understanding these differences is crucial because labels often fail to capture personal nuance. If you really want to understand someone's view on the universe, don't just ask them for their label, ask them what they mean by it, ask them about the key to the locked door.
That's good advice. It really makes you wonder if we're asking the wrong question entirely. We're obsessed with who is there a God?
Yeah.
But maybe the how, the agnostic discipline of admitting what we don't know, is actually more useful.
That's the lingering thought, isn't it? In a world that demands hot takes and absolute certainty, saying, I don't know, might actually be the most radical intelligence stance you can take. Are we brave enough to leave the question mark at the end of the sentence? Or are we desperate to force a period?
Leaving the question mark. I love that. Welcome to the gray area. Thanks for thinking deeper with us.